Thomas Jefferson was born on April 13, 1743, at the family estate of Shadwell in the colony of Virginia. He was the third of 10 children born to Peter Jefferson, a self-made planter and surveyor, and Jane Randolph Jefferson, a member of one of Virginia's most prominent families. From an early age, Jefferson was exposed to both the practical skills of frontier life and the intellectual traditions of the colonial gentry. His father's death when Thomas was only 14 left him with a strong sense of responsibility for his family's estate and shaped his early independence. He inherited land, slaves, and a legacy of hard work, which would define much of his personal and public life. Jefferson's education began at home under tutors and local schools, but it was at the College of William and Mary that he truly flourished. Enrolling at age 16, Jefferson encountered some of the greatest minds of colonial America. He studied philosophy, mathematics, science, and law, but it was the Enlightenment ideals of reason, liberty, and human progress that left a lasting impression on him. His mentors included Dr. William Small, who introduced him to the writings of John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton, which Jefferson later called the three greatest men who ever lived. Under this intellectual influence, Jefferson developed a lifelong passion for knowledge, science, and architecture. He was known as a voracious reader, spending countless hours in the college library, and he began to cultivate a vision of America grounded in reason and liberty. After graduating, Jefferson studied law under George Wythe, one of the most respected legal scholars in Virginia. His training gave him not only a strong foundation in the law but also a sense of civic duty and justice. By the mid-1760s, he was admitted to the Virginia bar and began practicing law, quickly gaining a reputation for his skill and intellect. At the same time, he entered public life, serving in the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1769. In his early political career, Jefferson already displayed a commitment to individual rights and opposition to arbitrary authority, voicing resistance to British taxation and colonial policies that infringed upon local governance. Jefferson's personal life during this period was marked by his courtship and marriage to Martha Wales Skelton, a wealthy young widow. The two married in 1772 and moved to Monticello, the hilltop estate Jefferson had begun designing and building as a young man. Their marriage was a happy but tragically short one. Martha bore 6 children, but only 2 survived to adulthood, and she herself died in 1782 after just 10 years of marriage. Jefferson was devastated, and although he would form other close relationships later in life, he never remarried. By the mid-1770s, Jefferson had emerged as a leading voice for American independence. His eloquence as a writer set him apart from many of his contemporaries, and when the Second Continental Congress. When Thomas Jefferson assumed the presidency in March of 1801, he walked into the capital city of Washington, D.C., on foot rather than arriving in a grand carriage. This act of humility was a deliberate signal of his vision for the Republic, a government led not by aristocratic pomp but by civic duty and republican simplicity. Jefferson believed the country should avoid monarchy-like traditions and instead nurture the democratic spirit that had fueled the Revolution. His inaugural address stressed reconciliation, declaring, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists," hoping to heal the partisan divisions that had deepened during the bitter campaign. Jefferson's presidency quickly demonstrated both his philosophical convictions and his pragmatic side. He sought to reduce the size of the federal government, cut military expenditures, and eliminate the national debt, which he considered a danger to liberty. He believed in limited government and envisioned America as a nation of independent farmers, where land ownership gave citizens the virtue and independence necessary for self-government. Under his direction, taxes were reduced, government offices were trimmed, and he emphasized fiscal responsibility. At the same time, however, Jefferson understood the need for flexibility when circumstances demanded it, and this willingness to bend his principles when faced with national interests defined many of his major decisions. One of the most significant events of Jefferson's presidency came in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. France, under Napoleon Bonaparte, offered to sell the vast Louisiana territory to the United States for $15 million, doubling the size of the nation at a stroke. Jefferson recognized the immense value of the purchase for securing land for future generations of farmers and ensuring control of the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans, which were vital for trade. Yet, the acquisition tested his constitutional scruples. As a strict constructionist, Jefferson had long argued that the federal government should only exercise powers explicitly granted by the Constitution, and nowhere did the Constitution say anything about buying land. In the end, Jefferson reasoned that the power to make treaties could encompass land acquisition, and he seized the opportunity. The Louisiana Purchase became one of the crowning achievements of his presidency, securing space for westward expansion and shaping the future of the United States. Following the purchase, Jefferson commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the newly acquired territory and chart a path to the Pacific Ocean. Meriwether Lewis, his private secretary, and William Clark led a team of explorers, scientists, and soldiers westward. Their journey, lasting from 1804 to 1806, yielded invaluable geographic, scientific, and ethnographic information. They encountered Native American tribes, documented plant and animal life, and opened the way for future expansion. As Thomas Jefferson entered the twilight of his life, the weight of his years, both in accomplishment and in contradiction, rested heavily upon him. By the 1820s, his health was declining steadily, his finances were in shambles, and yet his intellectual vigor remained strong. He continued to correspond with former allies, friends, and rivals, and his words carried an air of both wisdom and humility. To the young republic he had helped to found, he was already a legendary figure, one of the last surviving architects of independence, yet in his personal estate of Monticello he struggled against the same forces of debt, dependence, and social change that so many Virginians faced. Jefferson's financial problems consumed his later years. Despite his disciplined habits in other matters, his management of Monticello was not marked by thrift. He lived with an open hand, entertaining guests, extending hospitality, and funding ambitious projects such as the University of Virginia. The fluctuations in the value of crops, poor harvests, and the long-term effects of borrowing left him deeply in debt by the end of his life. Though he wished to leave Monticello intact for future generations, he understood that his heirs would likely be forced to sell it and much of its property, including the enslaved people he had never freed. This realization was a painful acknowledgement of the gap between his ideals and his reality, for while Jefferson had written so passionately about liberty and human rights, he remained entangled in an institution that denied both. The moral contradiction of slavery hung like a shadow over Jefferson's legacy even during his lifetime. He had repeatedly described the institution as a moral evil and a danger to the republic's survival, famously likening it to holding a wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him, nor safely let him go. Yet he failed to take decisive action, arguing that emancipation without colonization would lead to racial conflict. His reliance on enslaved labor for Monticello, his unwillingness to free most of those he owned, and his relationship with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman who bore several of his children, have remained points of intense debate. For Jefferson's contemporaries, many viewed him as a man caught in the paradox of his age, while posterity has judged him both as a visionary of liberty and as a man limited by the prejudices and dependencies of his time. In his final years, Jefferson found solace in his intellectual pursuits. His crowning achievement, the University of Virginia, began to take shape just as his strength began to fail. He oversaw every detail of its design, insisting that the architecture reflect both classical ideals and Republican simplicity. He recruited professors from abroad, developed a curriculum that placed emphasis on science and modern thought alongside classical studies, and envisioned the university as a model for future institutions of higher learning. To Jefferson,